Hi there. On the bench today is my very own ICOM IC-746 that usually sits right about there. So I guess it's a little bit jealous of the Yaesus that have been on the bench here and wants part of the action. I don't know. So this is a story on this IC-746. I got this thing about 8 to 10 years ago, and I got it with a box and a factory service manual. So the fellow I bought it off of says it worked absolutely no problems, no hitches, no nothing. He says he's been using it for a long time, and I was kind of curious about the service manual, and he says, oh, I just managed to find one. Another fellow had one, and I took it. So I took it for face value, and I did believe him, and I kind of still do believe him because this is kind of an odd problem. But I bring the thing home, run it for an hour, and the display goes out. I'm going, man. So I pull the thing apart and find out that a little transistor inside the display had got so hot that it desoldered itself from the board. The little heat sink on it had turned blue. It's a surface mount transistor. Now at the time I took pictures of this transistor, and it's in one of my old computers, so if I can find it, I'll edit it in here and maybe even fix how I fixed it with a TO220 style package transistor. And I've had absolutely no problems with the display since. As you can see, it's glowing right now. Everything's good. So a couple days ago now, even before I started working on that vacuum tube voltmeter project, I wanted to talk to a bunch of guys down in the 3700 megahertz area, so 3.7 megahertz in around that range there. So my antenna is tuned to 3880 or 3.880 megahertz, so I got to hit the tune button to bring it down. And when I hit the tune button on the radio, it kind of made some grinding, freewheeling noises. And I'm thinking, did I forget to do something here? Maybe operator error. So I look at everything, and I'm forgetting how to run my own radio. Now I've been playing with so many other radios lately. So no, so I hit it again. It makes this kind of a freewheeling, buzzing, grinding kind of noise, and I'm going, great. Now there's something wrong with the antenna tuner in this thing. So that's what it sounds like to me. So this radio is really clean inside. I did a bunch of mods to it when I got this thing to make sure. There's a couple of parts in here that are failure prone, let's put it that way. So when I got the thing, I put some heat sinks on some of the parts that get a little bit too warm in there. And there's an MMIC in here that's known to fail because of the heat issues and stuff like that. So I went through that, and I did all this back then, so I'm familiar with the radio inside, and it was really clean. It didn't look like anybody had ever been inside this thing. So now I have to go back in, and the thing probably only has maybe in 8 years, I'd say maybe 5 hours of talk time, something like that, and almost no antenna tuner use. So I don't know what's going on there, but just like in all the other videos, sit back, relax, enjoy. Follow along as I make this antenna tuner in my ICOM IC-746 work again, so I can talk where I want, and I'm not limited to that little portion of the bed that my antenna's tuned to. So let's get into it. In order to get inside of an ICOM IC-746, what you have to do is remove the screws on the top. There's a whole bunch of screws here. You have to remove the handle from the side. I've already removed the screws just to simplify this. So you have to remove the screws on the sides, and then the top pretty much just comes off, like so. And now we're inside. Now there's a whole bunch of screws that hold this shielding plate on, and they're all around the perimeter here. You have to remove all of these screws, and then there's two little tangs that are kind of underneath the speaker here, so when you want to remove the top of this, just kind of slide it over this way, and then bring it out. And you're in, and that's pretty much that easy. So you can see the final amplifier section here, and then of course some filtering, and then this is the antenna tuner section right here, and right down in here are the two antenna tuning motors. And that's right now what I'm thinking is going to be an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'll reposition the camera, and I'm going to turn this thing on and let you hear what I kind of hear, and we'll kind of diagnose this from that point. We're now looking at the motors in this antenna tuner. So there's one motor right here, and there's another motor right here, and they're kind of on little pins here so that they can move around a little bit. Now there's one, you see this black thing in here, this is a coupler that's coupling the motor to that variable capacitor. And there's another coupler on this motor coupling this motor to another variable capacitor underneath this circuit board. And it sounds like something's slipping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the radio's power on and we'll watch both motors to see if we can see these couplers turning. So here I go. So right now it looks like this one's trying to move and this one is displaying some form of torque. I can see that the motor is moving, like, you know, in and out, but I don't see that this coupler here is actually turning. So I'll move the dial here and see if I can make that move again, and watch this. You'll see it kind of move towards the chassis here, but you won't see any movement of the coupler. So that makes me almost think that maybe either the shaft is slipping in here or maybe even something is jammed. I'm not really quite sure at this point. So that will be the next thing that we look into. Since it looks like there's something actually jammed in this motor here, because we can see it displaying torque by it torquing forward or backwards as we move it, I'm thinking that the motor itself is probably trying to move and the capacitor itself is probably stuck or something like that. Maybe there's something even jammed in it. So I'm going to have to remove this circuit board to get down to that level, and how you really do that is you just remove these ribbon cables here. They just kind of pull out all the connectors and the coaxes. You have to desolder these SO239s at the back. Then you have to desolder the center conductor, and then of course the actual ground plane here attaches to the SO239 through this little tab here. So you pull out all these little connectors here, and you can mark them if you're scared you're not going to get them back into the same jack, or you can just use a digital camera and do it. You have to pull this little connector out right here out of this socket here, and once you've done all that, you also, one other thing, you can remove the speaker that'll aid getting this thing out. It's just kind of screwed onto the case here like so. You don't want to risk puncturing the speaker, so just take the two screws out and this will come off, and unplug it from here, and then desolder these as I say. Take out the screws and this whole board should just come right out. And the next level down is the antenna tuner, and when I'm down at that level I'll be back. Once you remove the 4 screws from the circuit board, which is here, 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 and here, you can just kind of flip this over. This one wire is soldered right into the board here, so you really can't undo this one right here. So that, unless of course you want to desolder it, of course, and this one jack is soldered heavy into the board here too, so you can't remove this one. So all you do is you just basically flip this over here like this, and then you have to remove these 2 screws here at the case, and then this shield just kind of comes up and out. So, like so. And then you're down at the antenna tuner. Now, I can move these with my fingers here, they have a little stop on them. This thing here, this motor actually, get this out of the way and get some light in here. This motor here, when I turn it, it feels like it's, okay. It doesn't feel like it's very gritty. I can stick a little screwdriver in here and I can move it, and I can feel the gearing actually turn in the motor as I'm doing this. It feels really smooth, but when I stick it into this one, listen to that. So I think the motor's actually trying to turn, but something just before the shaft is jamming up. And it's probably using the shaft, the actual shaft itself, to torque the motor against. So to me already it's feeling like it's inside of this motor here. So what I'm going to have to do is remove this entire board out of here, which looks like I'm just going to have to remove a bunch of screws down here. It looks like a relatively simple disassembly. And I'll lift this board out, and then we'll have to look at that actual motor and see what's going on inside of this tuner motor. Well, the tuner board came out as easy as pie, just a bunch of screws. This one here, this one. You got one here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. You just do them and it lifts out just that easy. And here it is. So next we're going to be looking at this motor. This one seems to be jamming up, and if there's some common issue with these actual motors, I'll take them both out and fix them, because I really don't want to have to go back in here again. So that'll be the next thing that we tackle, is getting this motor off here and loosening off the shaft and probably disassembling this motor, and we'll take a look inside of it. Here we are looking at the antenna tuning board. These are the two motors here that turn these two variable capacitors here, so they just kind of move in and out. And the motors look like they're actually just held on by the shaft couplers. You can see that they're kind of loose here on the stud. That into the shot there. These are kind of loose, so there's nothing really holding these motors on except the actual couplers here on the shaft. Now, in order to get these motors off, you need to remove these little screws in here, and they take a 1.5 millimeter hex key. And that's what this is right here. So you stick one of these in here, and then you can just undo those little screws in there, and then you'll be able to remove the motors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this side here first, because this is the offending side here, and we'll take a look inside the motor. So I'll remove this hex key and put it into this coupler here, and I'll just remove them. See how tight they are? Oh, they're actually really quite loose. I might be able just to do this right here on camera. And I'll undo this one here, and it looks like it just comes off like that. Just that simple. So this motor feels really gritty, and the way that this thing is put together, I don't know if you can see this, they've got these they're pinched together, somewhat like the potentiometer in the vacuum tube voltmeter. They're kind of got these little tabs that crimp over here. This looks like metal, so if worse comes to worse, this could be soldered back together, I'm pretty sure. It's hard to get this into the shot. This is just pinched over here, 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 and here. So what I'm going to do is I'll get a sharp pair of nippers, and I'm not going to cut these off, but usually a sharp pair of nippers you can get underneath these and just bend them back carefully. And then we'll get inside the motor here and check out what's inside that's making this. So listen to that. That's sounding pretty rough. So that'll be the next step. I've now bent the four little tabs back so that I can get inside this motor. So now this little bottom piece here is going to come off. So I'll just remove this here, and you can see the little gearing inside the motor. There's one gear right here. So I don't know why this is grinding. It seems like it's kind of freewheeling at this point here. So I'm thinking that either there's a piece of broken plastic, or maybe there's something jammed into the gears here. Something isn't quite right within this motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully look at this under the microscope and find out why this is feeling so gritty and nothing is really turning in here. It feels like there's almost something that might be jammed when that bottom plate is put back on here. So I'll just maybe I'll zoom in here a little bit. And you can see some of the gearing in there. All plastic gears, of course. Here's another gear here. It doesn't look like any of the gears are actually broken or anything, which is a nice thing. So, as I say, I'll inspect this, and when I have something to report, I will be back. Alright, well, there's lots of parts to this crazy little motor. First of all, we have the windings here. And this kind of just fits down inside of this shell. So you put this in here and it slides right down. And then we have this little platform here which houses the three little gears. It actually holds them on these little shafts here. And this fits on top of here like so. It all goes together like an Oreo cookie. And then you slide this down inside the case and you're ready to put your gears on. Now, in the center here, we have this little rotor, and this little rotor has got some tangs in it. I don't know if I can zoom in here and you might be able to see this. It's hard to keep things in the shot when it gets so close. Alright, you can see it has these kind of extrusions here in the... It looks like a piece of ferrite. And you can really see them there quite clearly. Now, this little plastic gear has the same thing that fits into those. You can see them right on the bottom little lip here. It fits into them and locks in. Now, up here, it looks like they've either glued or sonically welded this little top plastic piece here. And then, of course, that bead fits on here. And then this little thing is, rotating here. So you see this little thing here? So when I put this all together, how this actually goes together is I'll zoom out here. So this piece here fits onto here like so, and then it locks in, and then this little white piece on the top fits in here. Now, I can't see them assembling this thing without having to, sonically weld or glue this thing together. And what's happening is that's what's slipping in this little bead here. So what I need to do is glue this together, and it should be okay after that point. So then I'll put the motor back together, and it shouldn't be so grindy and intermittent. So what's happening is this is actually slipping in this little bead, and that's what's making that grindy kind of feeling. And it's offsetting as it's slipping too. It's kind of going off center, and then it's rubbing against. If you look inside here, you can see how this is kind of put together, and here it's kind of rubbing against this, and that's what's giving that grinding kind of feeling there. So that's what I'm going to do. I will glue this thing together and put it back in, and we'll give it a shot and see if I have antenna tuning action. And of course, if this one works, I should probably pull the other motor apart also and put some glue in it, maybe take it apart, see if it's broken. I don't think it's broken yet, but the way that these things are put together, I would imagine that it's probably not going to be too long before it starts to act up too. So what I did to repair this is I took this and I sprayed this down with brake clean. And I cleaned the gearing and everything. Of course, this is all apart at that time. I really hosed it down, and then I wiped everything off with a Q-tip and a rag. I kind of soaked a rag down and wiped everything down with it. And then I sprayed it down really hard again and basically let it air dry to make sure that there's absolutely no grease on this bead or on the gearing whatsoever. So then what I did is I took some of this glue here, this LePage glue. It's a super glue. And it bonds this almost instantly. So it takes this gear and basically makes it stick together like crazy. So what I did is I put some on the inside, and I slid this up inside and made sure that everything was flush, push down on this and make sure everything is all centered, and then I put this little top washer on. So because this top washer is broken off, you're gonna have a little bit of fun when you put some super glue in the top trying to get that centered. You have to use some screwdrivers to get that glue on your fingers, and pretty soon that gear is stuck to your hand. So you got to be really careful, and you got to get that down as quickly as possible, and then press that little top washer in there. It's really part of the center of this thing. It's not supposed to be broken off. So what's happened is I think they sonic welded. It looks like that's what they tried to do, and the little sonic welding is breaking in there. So I imagine the other one is probably just as bad, and I'm probably going to take that other motor apart, and if it isn't broken, I'll probably try and just push on it and maybe crack it, take it out, and then redo this while this whole thing is apart, because I really don't want to have to take this antenna tuning mechanism apart again in this radio. So I understand, again, in this radio, this is the sore spot of this radio, is these little motors are grief. So this one looks like it's all together. It's solid. That's never going to come apart again. That's one piece. I don't know why they just didn't do that in the beginning. Just fill the thing full of super glue, press it together, and away you go. So I don't know, but so this is really solid. I'll put this back together and try it out and go from there. Alright, I'm ready to put this thing back together. So I've already slid the windings in. They just kind of slide down into the case. So before you put this back together, you want to put just a little dot of oil on this shaft. And then when you put this together, slide that down in there like so. Now this is the little aperture that holds the gearing. So this has got to go, you have to put this in first. It won't slide down through this. So this has to go in the top like this. And it just kind of, again, slides down in there. Make sure that you're not hitting your little rotor. Okay, so that's in there now. Alright, and then we have our gearing, which is over here. You can see it's kind of, I've put it in this little order so that I don't forget which way I pulled it out. Push that down in there, still a little bit popped up, so there we go. You can see that this is spinning nice and freely in here. I don't know if you can see that on camera. Spins nice and freely in there. Okay, and these are the little gears here. So the center one has to go in first. And when you take the gearing out, you want to make sure that you put it the same way so you don't forget, because it's a real pain to sit and have to figure this stuff out. So I'm just going to put a little dot of oil on each one of these. Just a little dot, because it already has quite a bit of grease in here. So put the center one in first, and I'll put this one in here in second, like this, and this one goes in here like so. Alright, those little gears fit in there just like that. Alright, and now this has got quite a bit of grease on it still, and there's even grease in that little hole in the bottom there. So that fits in there like that. I just put a little bit on this gear here, and I'll actually put just a little bit here also, because there's a plastic little shim or bushing style bearing on here, and then this just fits on the top. Now these little pins have got to poke through the top. I don't know if you can see that there. See these little holes here? These little pins that have got to poke through, and that keeps the gearing aligned. So that's pressed together, so now when I turn this, it should turn pretty freely. And it sure does. Listen to that. So that's what I want to hear. So it sounds like it's going to be working just fine at this point. Now what I'm going to do to hold this case together is, I don't want to create too much heat. There's a lot of plastic around here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little bit of solder here and a little bit of solder in the opposite corner, and that should hold this together quite nicely. I might be able to get away with this one. This one I'm kind of leery about because it's so close to this washer here. I don't want to cause any issues. I could try to bend these back in again, but they're looking pretty rough. So I'll see what I come up with, and I will report on how I put this thing back together and how it stays together. The motor is now reassembled, and I did solder the 4 little tab areas, and for a little bit of extra support on the other side, I did solder this bottom plate to the side here. And I'll just zoom in a little, and you can see there I've soldered the bottom plate to the side on this side, and I did on this side here also. So this is extremely solid and will never move, and just say down the road sometime I ever have to service this, I can just unsolder these 4 little spots here and run my desoldering tool across here, and the same around the other side there, and it will come right apart. Now I don't imagine that this is going to fail. It's very solid. I'll just let you hear it here. Put it by the mic. I'll turn the little shaft here, so you can hear that. Very smooth. Sounds much smoother than the other one too, so I imagine the other one might have the beginnings of an issue. So what I'm going to do is remove the other one and do the same thing to it, because when I put this back together, I don't want to have to take it apart ever again. So that's what's next. I've got the antenna tuner installed in the radio again, and I'm ready to turn it on and see if the motors spin. So here I go. I'm ready to turn the power on right now. Looks good. Both moving good. I'll just move the band around here. Turn the speaker down here. I'll just rotate the dial. Yeah, no problems. Yeah, it's working good. Looks good. So the motors are both moving. Now what I'm going to do is actually focus the camera on the screen of the radio, and I'll go to some parts of different bands and we'll actually try the tuning and see if it'll flatten the SWR out. I'm ready to test the tuner in this ICOM. So I've got my RF power turned right down, and really good practice for when you are using a tuner in any radio is to give it just enough RF power to make the tune. Don't leave the RF power turned right up to the top. It's really hard on the radio. Now granted, a lot of radios will automatically turn the power down for you, but it's always good practice to just turn it down. And another safety practice is to run it on the AM mode. A lot of the times that will limit you from putting out full RF power. If you're doing it in the CW mode, a lot of radios will cut the power down still, and many of them won't. So you have full control in the CW mode. You'll be putting out full RF power if you leave your RF power right up. The AM mode will cut it down to about half if you accidentally leave it, you know, right up to the top. So I am now in the 80 meter band, So let's try a 3.7 megs here around, and I'll give it just a little bit of RF power and hit the transmit button here. This is the SWR scale here, and this is the power output up here. So of course we're looking for a flat SWR. And it was just that fast. So this antenna tuner is working really good. Let's try this 80 meter antenna up in the 29 megahertz range. Let's go halfway through 29 megahertz and see if it'll tune it. Alright, here we go. Just a little bit of RF power output, and here we go. Just that fast. No problems with the antenna tuner here. Working very, very well. So that makes me happy. Now I can put the lid back on this radio and put it back up there where it's supposed to be. We are to the end of yet another troubleshooting session. My ICOM IC-746 now works very, very well, and it's time to go back to where it came from, which is right about there. So if you enjoyed this episode, give it a big thumbs up and hang around. There'll be a lot more of this kind of video coming up in the very near future. So on to the next project. See you next time.